We left off last time um, here, but let's do a quick review. I've been going over this a few times, and go on. I want to make sure that everybody has a reasonable grasp of this sugya so far. And let's just recap. The basic question in the sugya is question here. It's the very first question. The Mishnah says, Yoma Kippurim Asur B'Achilava, etc. The first question in the Gemara is Asur. If you hear me pause, I may have mentioned this in another share. Once in a while, I get a little window that says my internet connection is unstable. And based on listening to the recordings, I think sometimes when that happens, nothing comes through on the other side. So if I see that pop up, I'm just going to stop talking until it goes away. Okay. So the Gemara asks right away, Asur Anush Karev. How can the Mishnah say that Yom Kippurim is Asur B'Achila B'Shtiyah when we know if you eat and drink on Yom Kippur, you're Chayav Karet? We know that from elsewhere. And I showed in the beginning of Kritot, it's the first Mishnah in Kritot, it's mentioned there. Of course, the Torah says it, we saw. So we want to know, how can the Mishnah, why does the Mishnah say that it's Asur, which implies that the basic implication of Asur in other Mishnayot in regarding Yisur v'Heter, it usually means in this context it would be Asur Midan, but even then, the Mishnah should say it's that you're fake. So I need this. The only reason I need the Mishnah to say Asur is to include Chatzi Shiur. It's to include the idea of Chatzi Shiur. That if you eat less than Shiur on Yom Kippur, that's Asur. But you're not Chayav Karet. In other words, so in that sense, if that's true, if that's the way we understand, then the Mishnah is properly worded. By saying Asur, it's telling me something for which the Torah actually forbids you, not Chayav Karet. So that's the reason the Mishnah would say Asur, and the Mishnah does not say Chayav Karet. So, of course, this leads into the next problem. So the next problem is that this works according to Rabbi Yochanan, because Rabbi Yochanan holds that Chayav is Asur Min Torah. And so therefore what? So that when the Mishnah says Yom Kippurim Asur B'Achila B'Shtiyah, and now I'm taking into consideration what Rabbi Yela says, that it's talking about Chatzi Shiur, so then it makes sense. Yom Kippur is Asur, Midioraita, to eat or drink even less than a Shiur. That's how we read it. But if you hold the Chatzi Shiur is permitted by the Torah, then what can you say? In other words, how can understand the language of the Mishnah? And so on this, the Gemara brings the machloket between Rabbi Yochanan and Rish. The Itamar Chatzi Shiur, Rabbi Yochanan Amar Asur Min Torah, Rish Lakish Amar Mutar Min Torah. So, and then it repeats the question more explicitly. Hanicha Rabbi Yochanan Rish Lakish Ma'ikul Lamem. So the Gemara answers, Modeh Rish Lakish Asur Midurabanan. Rish Lakish acknowledges that Chatzi Shiur in our, that the Chatzi Shiur is Asur Midurabanan. So how does that answer the question? How does Rish Lakish understand the Mishnah?
since it's a sort of de Rabbanan, there's a lesser level of penalty. So you're not chayav karet.
Okay, what was the question and what was the answer?
The question is why does it say asur when the language of the Torah said it, when we know that's chayav karet? Why say asur rather than chayav karet?
That's not our question.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm spaced out. But why does it say asur? Why does it say the achilat? I'm sorry. I'm really spaced out right now. Just let somebody else answer.
Okay. Does anybody else want to jump in?
I'm sorry, I had to step out. Can you repeat the question?
My question is, what's the question? So the Gemara here says, Hanicha Rabbi Yochanan, El Reish Lakish Ma'ikal Meimar. The Gemara says, Moda Reish Lakish Asur Midurabanan. Okay, so what's Nicha? What goes well for Rabbi Yochanan?
So what goes well with Rabbi Yochanan is that there is a lesser level. I mean, it's.
Don't talk about lesser level. What we want to know is what does the word asur mean in the Mishnah? That's the main focus here. Why does it say asur in the Mishnah?
It says asur meaning that it's simply not permitted. It's
okay. No, that we understand what the literal meaning is. Why does it say asur? Why does it say asur? So here, let's go through this again. The Gemara's first question is, why does it say asur? We know that it's a chiyuv karet. So how does Rabbi Yochanan answer that question?
He said,
Michael Schwartz.
He's referring it to a Chetzi Shur, and Rabbi Yochanan holds that a Chetzi Shur is allowed is allowed in the Torah. Opposite.
The other way around.
Okay.
Yochanan holds.
Rabbi Yochanan holds that it's a sur midaraita. Resh Lakish holds that it's mutar deraita.
Okay, so yes.
How can it be that the word has a different meaning in the Torah and in the Mishnah?
It doesn't.
Because if the Mishnah wants to commend the Torah, so the Mishnah has to accept what is written in the Torah, the words at least. They can't change the meaning of the words, because if they do change the meaning of the words, they can change everything.
No. Wait a second. What word in the Torah is being?
That's the word asur. Is the word asur used in the Torah?
We know that. We understand that the word asur means forbidden. Nobody knows that the word asur means forbidden. Nobody disputes that. And we also know that the Torah says. We also know that it says that you're not allowed to eat and drink on Yoma Kippurim. Okay, it actually it does.
You need to
right. Okay, and later on, the Gemara is going to explain how it knows that this refers to eating and drinking. Okay, our question is, what does the word asur mean in our Mishnah? So Rabbi Yochanan says it means it's asur midioraita to even a chatzi shiur on Yom Kippurim. That's the hanicha of the Rabbi Yochanan. So if we hold these things, that chazor is asur midioraita, then I can understand our Mishnah. Our Mishnah says Yom Kippurim asur ba'achila v'shtiyah. So now I'll understand. Rabbi Yochanan will say that means one is not allowed to eat even less than a shiur on Yom Kippurim. And why didn't the Mishnah say chayav karet? After all, you're chayav karet. because it wants to introduce this other concept. This other concept meaning that when you eat less than a shiur, the Torah still forbids that. The Torah still forbids that. So it's telling me more than what I knew from, let's say, the Mishnah in which lists eating on Yom Kippurim as one of the chiyuvei karet. So I know that if you eat on Yom Kippur, you're chayav karet. Why didn't the Mishnah here say Ochel b'shoteh Yom Kippurim chayav karet? Because it wants to tell us even more, that the Torah tells me you're not allowed to eat even less than a shiur, even though you won't be chayav karet. Even if you eat less than a shiur on Yom Kippurim, you're not chayav karet. So that's how Rabbi Yochanan would read the Mishnah. That's why it's nicha the Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan can understand a Mishnah in this very straightforward way.
Sheila, I have a problem. The word asur, I would understand it as something dichotomic. Either it's allowed or it's not allowed. You can either use fire on ladlik on Shabbat, or you are not allowed to do. You can't do something half. But here he speaks about something which is quantitative. He says, yes, it's allowed, it's forbidden, but if it's a little, it's allowed. So it's something very different. It's not a dichotomy. It's something which he speaks about something quantitative.
Okay, so that's the thing. Let's step back and let's give a little perspective to this, which we mentioned, I think, in the last year. We have a general question. When you're reading the Torah says, let's say, you have to eat matzah on Leil HaSeder, right? So what does that mean? You have to eat. I mean, if I take a little teeny bit of matzah and stick it in my mouth and swallow it, am I yotzei yedei chova? Would I consider that to be eating or not?
This is a quantitative example. It says a little or more, and so on. Yes.
Wait. No. But I want to know. I'm a from a yid. I'm a nice religious Jew, and I want to know when the Torah tells me I have to eat matzah on Leil HaSeder. What does that mean? In any legal system, you have to make hagdarot, right? You have to make definitions. So what is it? I'd have to know how much and what does it mean to eat? Is eating simply putting in my mouth? Does it mean I have to swallow it? Does it have to get past my gullet? Those are all actual real halachic questions. I really need to know all of those things if I want to be yotzei yedei chova, nagid be'achilat matzah b'leil HaSeder. The same thing here. The Torah tells me in so many words, right? Because we say, okay, in so many words, Torah tells me one is not allowed to eat on Yom Kippur. So now I need to know, what does that mean? So Rabbi Yochanan comes along and he says that means you can't eat anything at all. Period. Even though it's less than a shiur, you can't eat it on Yom Kippur. 1 second, just turning off my phone. You can't eat it on Yom Kippur. But the Torah differentiates in terms of punishment. So the Torah says you won't be chayav a punishment unless you eat at least shiur. But if you eat less than a shiur, then the Torah says there's no punishment, or at least the punishment is not karet. In terms of, I'm going to bracket that. We saw when we learned the last Mishnah in this parak that the Mishnah there lists different korbanot and what they come to be mechaper on, right? The different korbanot that have different kaparot, and the Mishnah makes differentiation between kalot, the chamurot, and it's a little bit complicated. So we're not going to go into that now. You could ask a question. Okay, if the Torah says something is forbidden but doesn't punish me, so what? Okay, so there's a philosophical aspect of that as well. But let's say from a legal aspect, one is not allowed to eat anything on Yom Kippur, according to Rabbi Yochanan, even less than a shiur. However, Reish Lakish says, no, actually the Torah permits you to eat less than a shiur on Yom Kippurim. So if you're allowed to eat less than a shiur on Yom Kippurim, according to Reish Lakish, so how can he understand the Mishnah? What's the problem? We've laid out the Mishnah must be talking about Chatzi Shiur, because if it was talking about a Shiur, then it would have said Chayav Karet. So we're saying, okay, it must be talking about Chatzi Shiur. But Rebbe Shlakish holds Chatzi Shiur is Mutar Min Torah. So according to him, it should have said Yom Kippurim Mutar B'Chayav Shtiyah. But it says Asur. So that's the question that we have now. So the Gemara answers that question.
So if I can attempt to sort of untangle what I was saying before, he answers. I mean, when he says that it is asura and then de rabbanan, he's answering the question by saying, if it's asura de rabbanan, well, we know that a de rabbanan prohibition is not hayav karet. Therefore, it answers the question.
Okay. Yes. So that's to the point. Moda Reish Lakish asur midurabanan. Reish Lakish acknowledges. He also says one is not allowed to eat less than a shiur on Yom Kippur. But if you eat less than a shiur on Yom Kippurim, the Torah permits it, but the Rabbanan forbade it. Rabbanan said it's asur. So therefore, what? My basic question, my original question, is now answered. The original question being, why does the Mishnah use the Lashon of asur if eating and drinking is a chiyuv karet? So now we've answered. According to Reish Lakish, the asur, he means asur midrabanan. And both Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish will read the Mishnah to be speaking about a chatzi shiur. And as I said, where will they know the din of a shiur? They can know that from elsewhere. They can know that in the Mishnah in Kritot. So this is the first part of the sugya. So Bein Rabbi Yochanan, Bein Reish Lakish, I understand that our Mishnah is talking about Chatzi Shiur, and one is not allowed to eat a Chatzi Shiur on Yom Kippur. According to Rabbi Yochanan, the Torah forbids it, and according to Reish Lakish, the Rabbanah forbid it, but it's Mutar Min Torah. So then the Gemara asks, so if it's true that now essentially we have kind of forced Reish Lakish into this position of saying that Chatzi Shiur on Yom Kippur is Asur Midrabanan. So if it's true that according to Rabbi Yochanan, according to Reish Lakish, eating a Chatzi Shiur on Yom Kippur is Asur Midrabanan, and then, as I mentioned last time, the machloket between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, as you brought stam, it doesn't say Chatzi Shiur b'Yom Kippurim. It says Chatzi Shiur. So I understand that Rabbi Yochanan Kish, throughout the Torah, there's going to be a question regarding less than a shiur of something that's forbidden to eat. So that's not only eating Yom Kippur, that would be eating anything that the Torah forbids you to eat. So eating treif, eating tevel, eating anything that the Torah forbids you to eat. Rabbi Yochanan is going to say that the Torah forbids Chatzi Shiur, and Reish Lakish is going to say that the Torah permits it, but the Ranan forbid it. So, if it's true that Reish Lakish holds that Chatzi Shiur is Asur Midurabanan, then lo nichayeva le korban shvua. Then one should not be chayav a korban shvua regarding chatzi shiur. So then we spent a lot of time last time, and maybe from the time before, understanding this question. So I'm going to summarize the question, or we'll read through this straight. So, so if it's true that according to Reish Lakish, shiur is asur min Torah, then he shouldn't be chayav a korban shvua. So now we want to understand what's the situation where someone would be chayav korban shvua for a chatzi shiur. What is that case? So it's from here. It starts from the Mishnah in Shavuot. Shavua shelo ochal. Someone makes a shvua that he will not eat. But then he went ahead and he ate treif. He's chayav. What is he chayav? What chiyuv does he have?
Korban shvua.
He has to bring a korban shvua because he violated his shvua. Now, why would we think that he wouldn't be chayav korban shvua?
Because treif may not be considered food. It's effectively not considered food. Therefore, he didn't.
Okay, or eat it, or maybe a little more meduyak, that we might think that when somebody says, "I'm not going to eat," that they're only referring to not eating things which are otherwise permitted, because it would go with saying that I'm not going to make a shua not to eat treif. The Torah already told me I can't eat treif. But then I see the Mishnah says that no, if you eat treif, you're chayav. So you violated your shvua and you have to bring a korban. You have to bring a korban shvua. So, and Rabbi Shimon poter. Rabbi Shimon says no. If you swore that you're not going to eat, and then you ate treif, you're patur from a korban shvua. The havinan ba. So then we go at it, and we say amai chayav. So why should he be chayav? Mushba v'omed mehar Sinai. Why should he be chayav? He's already mushba v'omed mehar Sinai. What does that mean? He's mushba v'omed mehar Sinai.
He made a shvua at Har Sinai not to eat treif, and so you can't make a shvua on a shvua.
Right. In other words, every, whether they remember it or not, stood at Sinai and took a shvua to follow the Torah. So the Torah forbade eating treif, and so, and as Michael Schwartz just said, we know from elsewhere you can't make a shvua on a shvua. In other words, if I make a shvua that I'm not eat, and then and right after that I make another shvua that I'm not going to eat, the second shvua is in chal because I already made a shvua. So here, person made a shvua. All of us made a shvua not to eat treif. So when this person says, I'm not going to eat, then we'll understand that it doesn't include treif because he already made that shvua. So when he makes a shvua, general shvua, I'm not going to eat, it must be that it only refers to things that the Torah permits him. And now he's saying, I'm going to forbid something on myself that the normally permits. So that leaves us with the question, so then how can he be, according to the Tana Kama, how can he be chayav a korban shvua for eating treif when he was already mushba v'omed? So we have two answers. The answer that's most important for our is going to be Reish Lakish's answer. Because right now, in the context of the Gemara, that's the hanging question. The question that we haven't answered is, how can Reish Lakish be mechayev b'korban shvua on a chatzi shiur? Okay, that's our question. So, but in order to understand the Mishnah, the Gemara is first going to look at how different Amoraim dealt with this question. This question meaning, how can he be chayav a korban shvua for eating treif when he just said generally, I'm not going to eat. So Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Yochanan, they all said, "Kolel dvarim mutarim min dvarim ha'asuri." So they all say the way you need to understand the Mishnah is when he said shvua shelo ochal, he actually said more than just those words. He said, I'm not going to eat both permitted things and not permitted things. So to make an explicit example, you could say, I'm going to eat a cheese, a kosher cheese sandwich, and I'm going to eat it with ham. Okay? Or I'm not going to, right? So he made a specific shvua because we're talking about the negative. He says, I'm not going to eat a cheese sandwich with kosher cheese and kosher bread, and I'm not going to eat it with ham. So now he's made shvua on things that are both mutar and asur. So Rabbi Yochanan hold, since the shvua can take hold on the part that is mutar lo, but it's all one shvua, we're not going to break up the shvua, and we'll say that the shvua also takes hold on the part that's asur lo already, that is the treif part. So the way Rashi explains this, b'kolel shvua shelo ochal lo basar shchuta v'lo basar nevela, right? That Rashi's example is when he says, I'm not going to eat kosher meat or treif meat. Demigo de chayala ahetera chayala nami aisura. Since the shvua is going to fall on the part that's mutar, the basar shchuta, or in our example, the cheese sandwich, chayala nami aisura. It's also then going to be included to fall on the part that the Torah already forbade him. Rabbi Shimon Poter, and so that's the way Rav Shmuel, Rabbi Yochanan understand the Tanna Kama. Rabbi Shimon is Poter, so how would he understand that? Why is Rabbi Shimon Poter? The late Isur Kolel, Lo Amrin Amigo. He doesn't hold by this halachic concept of Isur Kolel. And he says, he's saying essentially there is no such thing, that when the Isur Kolel here would be the Shua. The Shua, in this Shua, you're saying Lo Ochal, I'm not going to eat. So you're making something Asur on yourself. You're creating your own Isur. So according to the Tanna Kama, Isur Kolel, if you say, I'm not going to eat kosher and I'm not going to eat treif, since you said, I'm not going to eat kosher, you already have a shvua, but in the same breath, you said, I'm not going to eat treif. So then that becomes part of your shvua, the Isur Kolel. The whole Isur is now included. And Rabbi Shimon says, no, I don't hold that. You can't override this mushbah omeid mehar Sinai or some other shvua that you might have made, and Isur is not kolel. So he says you're patur. So even if according to this, even if you said explicitly shvua shelo ochal lo basar shluta v'lo basar nevela, you said all of that explicitly. Rabbi Shimon is still going to be there because he says, look, the part that you said about lo basar nevela, it just doesn't have any effect. It doesn't work. And the Chachamim say, the Kama says, no, it does work. And that's the difference between Isur Kolel and not Isur Kolel. Now, why does Rabbi Shimon hold one way and the Chachamim hold another way? We're going to leave that. That's a whole separate sugya. It's an interesting question, this idea of Isur Kolel and the idea of Mio, which is a very important concept in many other parts of the Gemara. But for right now, we're just going to go with it, right? So there's an idea that has now been introduced of Isur Kolel. So this is how Rav Shmuel and Rabbi Yochanan understand this Mishnah and Shavuos. So basically, they read the Mishnah like this: Shvua shelo ochal lo davar hamutar v'lo davar ha'asur. V'az achal neveirot shod shkatzim urunasim is chayav, because even afal pish mushba omer har Sinai, there's an isur kolel where now he's going to be chayav even for eating things that he was already asur to eat. He'll be chayav the korban shvua for eating things he was already asur to eat. Now, that's a long explanation of this part of the Gemara. It's not again, I want to emphasize it's not immediately relevant to the question that's bothering us. So, because why? Because we're still concerned with this question of Chatzi Shiur. Rav Shmuel and Rabbi Yochanan here don't connect the concept of Chatzi Shiur to this Mishnah and Shavuot. It's not part of their calculus. It's not that they were in the Mishnah. But Reish Lakish Amar, Reish Lakish, how will he understand? How does he understand the Tanakama saying Shvua shelo ochal v'yachal neveilot u'trefot chayav? How does he understand? Why should that person be chayav if he's mushba mehar Sinai? So he says, "Eyat hamotzei el b'mafaresh chatz shiur v'ali b'derabanan o b'stam v'ali b'derabbi Akiva damar adam oser atzmo b'chol shu." Reish Lakish says, no, I understand this Mishnah completely differently. The only way you can understand the Mishnah is if it's talking about Chatzi Shiur, and according to the Tanakama, he would have said, Shua shelo ochal afilu Chatzi Shiur. And it could be anything. It doesn't matter. In other words, it could be it could be anything, including treif. So let's make sure we understand this. So somebody says, Shua shelo ochal chatzi shiur, and then he eats treif. He's chayav korban shvua. Now, according to Reish Lakish, why will he be chayav korban shvua on eating a chatzi shiur of treif?
Because he explicitly said, first of all, the shavua was that he wouldn't eat a chetzi shiur, and according to Reish Lakish, a chetzi shiur is mutar deraita, and therefore the mushba omed b'har Sinai doesn't hold.
Doesn't hold. So, in other words, the way Reish Lakish gets rid of this question, mushba omed mehar Sinai, he says, I'll give you an example of somebody who eats treif where he's not mushba omed mehar Sinai. What would that be? Chatzi shiur, because Reish Lakish hold chatzi shiur is mutar min haTorah. So if he's mefaresh shua shelo ochal chatzi shiur, yachal chatzi shiur of neveirot u'trefot, he's chayav. That is, he's chayav korban shua. He bought the shua, and he doesn't have a prior shua me Sinai that would obviate this shua. And that would be according to the Rabbanan, because the Rabbanan hold that when a person says shua shelo chal stam, that means a shiur. So so this will work according to the Rabbanan if he said explicitly chatzi shiur, or it could work stam. In other words, I could say the Mishnah as it is written, shua shelo ochal, without modifying anything. It goes according to Rabbi Akiva, because Rabbi Akiva holds Adam Oser Atzmo B'chol Shuhu. That when somebody says, for example, I'm not going to eat, his intention includes, his statement includes anything. In other words, there's a difference between making a shvuah shelo ochal, where you've made something asur on yourself, and when the Torah says you're not allowed to eat. When the Torah says you're not allowed to eat something, they mean you're not allowed to eat a sheep. That goes back to the earlier part of the discussion. We understand that the Torah has definitions for achila, both for positive reasons and for negative reasons. Shiur to eat matzah, shiur not to eat treif. And so, but Rabbi Akiva says when it comes to a person he's making something asur on himself. So then I'm just going to go after what he says. So if he says shvua shelo ochal, making a shvua that I'm not going to eat, well, if a person says I'm not going to eat, then all it means they're not going to eat anything. And that's the Shita of Rabbi Akiva. We saw that it's in the first mission in the third Kabbalah. And Chalas. So that's how we understand that. Okay, so now, what do we get out of this? So Reish Lakish, how does he understand this chayav? Shvua shelo ochal, v'yachal neveirot u'trifot shkatzim u'remasim. Why is he chayav? He's chayav because when he made the shvua that he's not going to eat, it meant that he wasn't going to eat a chatzi shiur. Namely Rabbanan, meaning if it's according to Rabbanan, he had to say it explicitly, or even according to Rabbi Akiva, he didn't have to say it explicitly. But the reason he's chayav is because it's a chatzi shiur, and he's made to not eat treif of a chatzi shiur, or a chatzi shiur of treif. Okay. But not a problem, because we know there's a step to Reish Lakish. This works, all of this works if you hold Chatzi Shiur is mutar midioraita. And that's how Reish Lakish holds. But Reish Lakish holds one other thing. He holds it's asur midirabanan. He does hold Chatzi Shiur is asur midirabanan. So when this person says Shua Shelo Chal Chatzi Shiur and Achal Nebeirot Tzimur Masim, now I have a problem because when he forbade himself to eat anything, and even a Chatzi Shiur of anything, so granted, he wasn't forbidden by the Torah to eat Chatzi Shiur of treif, but he was forbidden by the Rabbanan, and he like all of us have a chiyuv the oraita to follow dinim the Rabbanan. So therefore what? Therefore he shouldn't be chayan shua. Because when he said shua shelo ochal chatzi shiur, and that's fine, shua shelo ochal chatzi shiur, but then he ate a chatzi shiur of treif. So the Torah forbade him to eat treif, not explicitly, but through through this other avenue of following dinim de Rabbanan. So therefore, he was already mushba ve'omeid mehar Sinai to follow dinim de Rabbanan. So the fact that eating less than a shur of treif is mutar midioraita doesn't. If that was all of Reish Lakish's shita, then it would be fine. But Reish Lakish, according to the way we're understanding Reish Lakish holds eating treif is chatzi shur of treif is asur midurabanan. It's a problem. So that's the question. This is the culmination. This part of the sugya is the culmination of this question. Ihachi lo nichayev alei korban. If it's true that Reish Lakish holds that chatzi shiur is asur midurabanan, then someone who makes a shvuah not to eat a chatzi shiur, and then he does eat a chatzi shiur, he should not be chayav a korban shvuah, because mushba ve'omed lo tasur. He's still mushba to not eat a chatzi shiur because the Rabbanan told him not to eat a chatzi shiur. So when we get up to here, this is just to understand that question. So before we'll look at Rashi here again to flesh this out a little bit more. Before I go on, let's think about it for a moment. So what are the implications? So if Reish Lakish if Reish Lakish holds the way he holds, the Chatzi Shiur is mutar midiraita be'asur midurabanan, then he can't read this Mishnah. In other words, the answer that we gave for Reish Lakish isn't going to hold to read this Mishnah, because now he can't tell us why this person here who said Shua Shelo Ochal Chatzi Shiur, why should he be chayav? He said according to what we understand, he should not be chayav. And if that's true, then if I can't answer this question, that means I'm going to push away Reish Lakish altogether. I'll say Reish Lakish his shita doesn't hold up. And then the only way that I can reconcile both this Mishnah, but more importantly, our Mishnah here, is going to be the way Rabbi Yochanan understands. Right? Because once I push away this idea, in other words, if I can't read this Mishnah here, Chayav, and Reish Lakish wanted to read this, talking about a Chatzi Shiur, and now I see that doesn't hold. So now I won't be able to find this, be able to reconcile Reish Lakish's Shita, the Chatzi Shiur is Asur Miduraban, with this Mishnah here. And meaning then I'm just going to, if I have no other evidence, I'm going to have to push it away. And I'll have to say Reish Lakish is wrong. That is, he doesn't have a way of understanding the Tanaim. So let's just read these last couple of lines again. So Reish Lakish is the only way to understand this Mishnah of Shua Shelo Ochal is in the case of somebody who's saying, I'm not going to eat a Chatzi Shiur. Rashi says, Reish Lakish chayav korban shvua al hanavela im machal kezayit shehu mushba alav mehar Sinai ela bochel chatzi shiur sheino mushba alav misinai ubishvuato nesar. right? So you won't be able to find a way. In other words, you can't read the Mishnah as talking about somebody who said, I'm not going to eat a shiur of something, a shiur, which would include a shiur of a nevela, because he's already mushba alav mehar Sinai. Rather, the only way you can understand this Mishnah is that the Mishnah is talking about a case where he said, Shua shelo al chatzi shua, sheino mushba alav Sinai, uv'shvuato ne'asar alav. The only reason that now he's forbidden to eat treif is because he gave himself an isur. And b'mefaresh chatzi or shelo afilu chatzi shiur, that was part of his shvua. The aliba the Rabbanan, the Amri the Shvuot, and Nishma Shelo Ochal Stam, Atzmo B'Kishiyur. Rabbanan holds somebody who says Shvuah Shelo Ochal without any other elaboration. That means he's not allowed to eat a shiur. But if he says explicitly b'mefaresh, then the Rabbanan will also agree. A person can make a chatzi shiur forbidden on himself by being mefaresh, by saying explicitly. That's the nature of shvuah, right? I just want to step outside for a second, right? This is something we understand about the name shvuah, where it says lahara l'hetiv. The Torah is giving each person an opportunity to make something forbidden on themselves that the Torah did not forbid. Right? And we saw the examples from the Rambam, from Mishnah, like if you say, hey, I'm not going to throw a stone in the ocean, the Torah doesn't tell you you're allowed to throw a stone in the ocean. You're allowed to throw stones in the ocean. The underlying assumption is the Torah permits everything except for what the Torah explicitly forbids. Right? This is also related to another halachic concept that the Gemara uses of kocha de hetera aviv. There's a certain power to heter over Isur because before the Torah came along, everything was permitted. Okay, let's say from anything that wasn't under the mitzvot b'nei Noach, the Torah permitted, and the Torah comes then to limit us and to forbid certain things to us. So now the Torah also gives you as an individual an option to further limit yourself. And you can do that by way of a shvuah. It's part of the concept of shvuah. Okay. So you can't find a way of understanding this Mishnah of shvuah shelo ochal that he should be chaya, and then he ate treif. He's chaya korban shvuah, unless he said explicitly, I'm not going to eat the chatzur, and this would be according to the Rabbanan who say that he would have to say it explicitly. Oh, bistam matzit lukma. You could also be Mekayim in the Mishnah where he didn't say explicitly, I'm not going to eat a chatzur. Umiu kishachal lo achal el chatzur. Sheino mushba alav misinai v'al yedei shvuah shelo ochal stam nesar bo. Right? So the person just said stam, I'm not going to eat, but then he went ahead and ate a chatzi shiur of treif, but he's not malav mehar Sinai. V'al yedei shvuah shelo ochal stam nesar bo. But he made it forbidden on himself by saying, I'm not going to eat. The aliba de Rabbi Akiva, the Amar Adam Muser Atzmo B'chol Shu. The Masechet Shvuot, Rashi says, Adam Nishma Shelo Ochal Oser Atzmo B'chol Shu. Rabbi Akiva says, and we saw this in the Mishnah, that somebody who says, I'm not going to eat without any further elaboration, he is now, according to Rabbi Akiva, forbidden to eat anything. The Hachitanan, because this is the way we learn in the Mishnah there. Shvuah shelo yachal kol shehu. Somebody made a shvuah that said, I'm not going to eat. but then he ate even a tiny amount. Rabbi Kiva, so Rabbi Kiva says he's chayav a shvuah for having eaten. Chachamim porim. Chachamim say he's patur because they hold that stam without elaboration you're not chayav for less than a shiur. Hilka hadik tani chayav. Therefore, that which it says in the Mishnah that he's chayav, in other words, the Mishnah here that we're concerned about. So when it says chayav, so if we hold like the Rabbanan, then we'll say the Mishnah is talking about a case where he said explicitly, I'm not going to eat a chatzi shiur. I feel the stuff. If say it's going Rabbi Akiva, we can leave the Mishnah as is without any further elaboration. Rabbi Shimon poter. As we saw earlier, so Rabbi Shimon's poter, even in this context of Chatzi Shiur, it's that Rabbi Shimon is still going to be poter. Rabbi Shimon l'ta'ameh. Rabbi Shimon goes according to his shita elsewhere, that b'chol shehu nami mushva misinai. Rabbi Shimon generally holds that when it comes to eating something that the Torah forbids, that the Torah forbade even a kol shu. Tanya b'Masechet Makot. We learned this in a Brighton Masechet Makot. Shimon Omer kol shehu makot. V'lo amru k'zayit ela linyan korban. Shimon says that this concept of eating a kol shehu, that if you eat a kol shehu of something that the Torah forbids you to eat, that applies, that will still apply to makot. What does it mean? Makot is a punishment you get mid'Rabbanan. V'lo amru kazayit ela linyan korban. They only said a kazayit regarding whether or not you need to bring a korban. Let's take a look at this, just a second. We glanced at this Mishnah a while ago. We're not going to go through the whole thing, but here in the third chapter of Makot, we have a listing of the Isurim in the Torah for which, if you violate them with Edim and Hatra'ah, with witnesses and witnesses who warn you that what you're about to do is asur and you'll be punished with such and such a punishment, then you're chayav malkot from the Torah. And so it gives a whole long list. And in the second Mishnah, it says, Kama yochal mina tevel b'yechayav. So tevel is, right, are fruits like generally, things that grow from the ground that you eat before they've had trumot and masrot taken. That's tevel. So you're not allowed to eat tevel. It's an isur Torah to eat tevel. And if you do eat tevel with edim and hatra'ah, then you're chayav malkot. So the Mishnah says, how much tevel do you have to eat to be chayav malkot? Not makot, malkot. Rabbi Shimon Omer kol shehu. Rabbi Shimon says, if you eat even the tiniest amount, you're chayav malkot. The Chachamim omrim kazayit. No, Chachamim say the Torah isn't the punishment unless you eat a shear, a kazayit. Amar lehem Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon says to the Chachamim, Ein atzodim li ba'ochel nemalak kol shehu chayav. Don't you agree with me that if you eat even a tiniest ant, which is included in shkatzim and masim, that the Torah forbids you from eating. So don't you agree with me that if you eat a tiny ant, that you're chayav malkot? Amru lo, so they back to Rabbi Shimon. So what they're saying is, yes, we do agree with you about that case, even though an ant is far less than a kazayit. It's basically a kol shehu. But there, the reason that you're chayav is because you're eating it as it was formed. In other words, the Torah forbids you to eat ants, and including in that understanding is would be even one ant, even though it's less than a kazayit. But in general, you need a kazayit. So he says back to them, Marlahen, in other words, what's our machloket about? About tevel, right? So tevel would include grain, right? So let's say I have grain that I didn't take moted masrot from. So he says the same way that that you agree with me that you're chayav for eating one little ant, you should with me that you should be chayav for eating one grain of wheat, one wheat, one wheat seed, one wheat corn. You should be chayav. Anyway, they don't agree with him, but that's the machlit here of Rabbi Shimon and the Chachamim regarding this question. So what do you see? Rabbi Shimon holds that the Torah was oser. When the Torah was oser things to eat, it was oser b'chol, right? Even the tiniest amount. And so then Gemara here on that Mishnah I'm not going to go through the whole Gemara, just to the part that Rashi quotes. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Kol shehu l'makot, lo amru chazayit el l'inyan korban. He says, Kol shehu is enough to get makot. The only reason we mention a kazayit is l'inyan korban. Just a second. I'm going to take back what I said before. Here, makot is used for makot mardut, which is an isur, which is the punishment midirabanan. But here in this context, it seems to go back to the Mishnah. It's talking about malkot. So Rishim says kol shehu makot, meaning that the Torah is made of malkot, like we saw Rabbi Shimon in the Mishnah, for even the kol shehu. But so then, what's the point of having a shiur? That's linyan korban. You're not chayav a korban for eating something that the shogeg that you weren't supposed to eat, unless you ate a kazai. Okay, that's Rabbi Shimon's sheet. So this is what she is saying. Rabbi Shimon Poter, Rabbi Shimon Tamar b'choshu nami mushva misinai. Hu titanya b'masechet makot. Rabbi Shimon Omer hu l'makot lo amru kazayit el inyan korban. Okay. Now Rashi gets to the heart of the matter in terms of the question that the Gemara has left hanging. Is virle reish lakish. Chatzi shiur asur midurabanan. If Reish Lakish holds that Chatzi shiur is asur midurabanan, hechi moki la lahai detani chayav yochel Chatzi shiur. How can he establish that when the Mishnah says Shwashlo ochal Hatzish Shvua Shelo Achal V'Yachanu V'Lo Treifod, he's chayav b'korban shvua. How can he say that's talking about somebody who ate a chatzi shiur? V'harei af alav mushba mishum delav delo tasur. He's also already taken a shvua not to violate any isurim. So that's again. So that's how the Gemara. That's where the Gemara is up to. It's all of this is to just ask this one question. Hachi, if Reish Lakish holds Hatzi Shiur is Asur Midirabanan, then you should not be Chayav Korban Shvua for eating a Hatzi Shiur. Because even though the Torah didn't forbid you to eat a Hatzi Shiur, according to Reish Lakish, the Rabbanan forbade you from eating a Hatzi Shiur. And if the Rabbanan forbade you to do it, then you're Mushba Sinai. So now you can ask a question. So Rabbi Shimon is poter altogether. So what did we say? Why is Rabbi Shimon poter for say Shvua Shelo Ochal? So we said a couple of things. We said if you learn the Mishnah the way Rav Shmuel and Rabbi Yochanan learned, the reason he's poter is because he doesn't hold by this idea of Isur Kolel. Because what did Rabbi Yochanan and Shmuel say? They said Shelo Ochal. He's talking about a case we said Shvua Shelo Ochal lo dvar hamutar but lo dvar ha'asur. And so he was kolel something that was already asur into something that was mutar. And that's why the shvua can be chal, and that's why it can be chayav ban shvua. So Rabbi Shimon there is poter. Why is he poter? According to, let's say, Rabbi Yochanan, to those three, right? Rav Shmuel, Rabbi Yochanan. He's poter because he doesn't hold by the idea of Isur Kolel. The fact that you went ahead and said, I'm not going to eat the Bar HaMutar and the Bar HaAsur, the fact that you said the Bar HaAsur doesn't mean anything. Because I can't include it in the Shvuah that the Torah allows you to make. So that's one answer to understanding how Rabbi Shimon holds. But but Reish Lakish doesn't hold. He also doesn't read the Mishnah about Isur Kolel. He reads the Mishnah talking about Hatzi Shiur. So if that's the case, then when Rabbi Shimon is poter, he's replying to the Chachamim in their shita. So according to the way Reish Lakish reads the Mishnah, Shvua Shelo Ochal, we understand it to mean Shvua Shelo Ochal Hatzi Shiur. Beifurash, Ve'aliv the Rabbanan, or B'stam Ve'aliv the Rabbi Akiva. So somebody says, I'm not going to eat a Hatzi Shiur. Now he's included he's included all possible foods. So he includes in that treif. And the Torah doesn't forbid him to eat a Hatzi Shiur of treif. So therefore, we wanted to say that the Reish Lakish would have wanted to say that's why he's chayav a korban shvua. And so then, how does Reish Lakish understand Rabbi Shimon? Why is Rabbi Shimon poter? Rabbi Shimon is poter because he holds elsewhere that Torah forbids a kol shehu. So just to clarify, Rabbi Shimon in this understanding of Rabbi Shimon says that the Torah is oser. When the Torah is there to eat things, they said even a kol shehu, meaning even a chatzi shiur. So what will we say? Reish Lakish will say, I hold like the Rabbanan, and I don't hold like Rabbi Shimon. Let me step back. I'm not sure if I've lost everybody here. I wanted to clarify this, right? We have this Mishnah that the Gemara quotes. We had a basic question about the Mishnah. How can Mishnah say that after a person said Shua Shelo Ochal and he ate treif, how can he be chayav of Korban Shua? He was mushva ve'omed mehar Sinai. So then we give two answers. What's the first answer?
He's chayav because it's the kolel.
It's an Isur Kolel, that it must be that when he made the Shua, that he said Shua Shelo Ochal lo basar shkuta v'lo basar nevela. And if that's the case, there should be Shimon Poter. Does everybody understand the question? Okay. So the reason Rabbi Shimon Poter is what she said. He doesn't hold by the concept of Isur Kolel. He simply disagrees with that principle. According to the Tanna Kama, you can be kolel davar ha'asur and davar ha'mutar in the isur that you've created for yourself in the shvua. And Rabbi Shimon says, no, you can't. Now, again, why? What's the conceptual basis for the machloket? We're not going into that, but that's their machloket. And that's the way these three, Rosh Shmuel, Rabbi Yochanan, that's the way they'll understand the Mishnah. Mishnah is talking about this question of Isur Kolel. According to the Tanna Kama, that Isur is Kolel, that you can make an Isur that will include something that should otherwise not be there, as it were. And Rabbi Shimon says you can't. Okay, so that's one shot in the Mishnah. So now we're setting that to one side. And now we come to Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish says, no, the way I understand this Mishnah is it's talking about Chatzi Shiur. And now we're bearing in mind that Reish Lakish holds that Chatzi Shiur is mutar min haTorah, but it's asur midurabanan. So the way we understand the Mishnah now, Shua Shelo Ochal Chatzi Shiur. Someone who makes a shua that he's not going to eat a Chatzi Shiur, and then he ate treif. So then, why is he chayav a korban shua?
He's chayav korban shua because the original shua at Sinai did not include chetzi shiur.
Perfect, right? Because he's already, even though he's mushva v'omed, but Reish Lakish says he wasn't mushva v'omed for a chetzi shiur. Rabbi Shimon is poter. Why is Rabbi Shimon poter? Because Rabbi Shimon holds or actually did forbid a chetzi shiur. The Midioraita kol shehu is asur. And the only difference between a chatzi shiur and a shiur is the inyan korban. So I just wanted to clarify that. Those are the two ways that the Gemara now has learned the Mishnah. This is taken from a sugya in Masechet Shavuot, which in greater detail, but for our purposes, this is what's important. Okay, so now, so as I say, we're up to now this point here. Wait a second, I lost my place. So we're up to this point here. And this point, this is where we have this question about Reish Lakish. Now, I do want to point out something that I find strange about the way the sugya is worded. according to the way we're understanding now, and this is Rashi's understanding, and I did not find any other Mefarshim that said differently than Rashi or offered an explanation. Our question was, if Reish Lakish holds that Chatzi Shiur is Asumi D'Rabanan, and he should not be Chayav a Korban Shvua on it. If he makes a Shvua about a Chatzi Shiur and then he eats a Chatzi Shiur of trade, he shouldn't be Chayav a Korban Shvua on that. So the question is, why wouldn't he be Chayav? If you hold, so we just went through and we showed the way Reish Lakish wanted to understand this Mishnah is to say we're talking about a Chatzi Shiur, and Chatzi Shiur is mutar min Torah. Therefore, he's not mushbava omed alav mehar Sinai, and therefore he's chayav. So the part that tells that he shouldn't be chayav is this idea that he's mushma because it's an isur d'Rabbanan. And so this last part of Rashi, where he says, "Isvir Rashi," inside, "Isvir Reish Lakish Chatzi Shiur Asumi D'Rabbanan Chimoki La Lahai D'Tani Chayav B'Ochel Chatzi Shiur Harei Af Alav Mushma Mishum D'Lav Lo Tasur." In other words, this right here, this is according to Rashi, this is the real question that we have. But these words actually don't appear in the Gemara. So I just want to point out, it's strange. We need Rashi here to supply us with what ultimately is the question on Reish Lakish. Because the way we learn now, we went through Reish Lakish Amar, Eyat HaMotzeh, El B'Mefaresh, or B'Stam. All of that explains how Reish Lakish can understand the Mishnah. He can understand why he's chayav a korban. But our question was, Yihachi lo nechayev korban shvua. So why isn't he chayav a korban shvua? Because apparently because of the idea of lo tasur. So it would have been much better, being like a critic of the editing of the Gemara here. The Gemara had ended off by saying what Rashi says. It should have said something like, Aval Reish Lakish, Hechi Moki Matnitin, Harehu Mushbavi Omed, Mehar Sinai, Me Lo Tasur. Okay, Rashi tells us that. I'm pointing this out. The Gemara doesn't say it. Rashi does it. So that seems to be the only way to understand this sugya. Yeah, I just wanted to point that out. Okay, so we spent the whole shir essentially going over what we went over last time, but I hope it's a little clearer now. When we come back next time, so I thought we would finish this off today, but we really don't have time. And the next part of the sugya goes from here. Here where it says Yagid V'Hailav Bar Haggadah Hutzlah. The here by this question, is offering us a possible answer for Reish Lakish, and then it pushes it away. So we'll see that next week. I don't even want to read it because it'll get too confusing. In the last few minutes, I think I mentioned I would tell you a little bit more about this question of Lo Tasur. It's a very interesting question, this question of Lo Tasur and this idea that we have to hold by Isurei D'Rabbanan. So I'm going to point to a couple of sources briefly, but I could give you a whole nother series of shiur on this, which I hope to do one day. If you've ever learned Hilchot Mamrim of the Rambam, you'll have learned this, but it will bear looking at again. So Hilchot Mamrim, right? The laws of rebellious ones or deniers, right? So Yesh Bichalan Tesha Mitzvot, Shalosh Mitzvot Taseh, V'Shesh Mitzvot Lo Taseh. We're not going to go through all of them, but let's see, what are the first ones? Lasot al pi haTorah shamru lanu beit din hadol. There's a mitzvah deoraita to follow what the Beit Din Hagadol, which the Rambam will define, to follow what they say. So that's an aseh. That's a positive commandment. You have to follow the Rabbanan. Bet shelo lasur midivreihem. And the second, Nisur Torah. You're not allowed to deviate from the words of the Beit Din Hadol. So then the Rambam begins by telling us in Halacha, Beit Din Hagadol Sheb'Yerushalayim Hein Ikar Torah Sheba'al Peh. Right? So the Beit Din that's sat in Yerushalayim, that is the Sanhedrin, they are the principle of the Torah, right, of the oral Torah. Hein Mamudei HaHora'ah, the columns of teaching, umehem chok u'mishpat yotzei l'chol Yisrael, right? From them, law and judgment goes out all of Israel. But Alein hifcha Torah, and the Torah made a promise about them, that the Torah promised us this reality. Shneimar al pi Torah asher yorucha, says in Parshat Shotim that you have to follow the Torah that they will teach you. Zo mitzvat aseh. So it tells us this is a mitzvah min Torah. You have to follow what the rabbis say. Everybody who believes in Moshe Rabbeinu and his Torah has to rely on this. Goes on to say, if you violate one of the teachings, one of the Piskei Dinim of the Beit Din HaGadol Sheb'Yerushalayim, then you have violated the Torah. Shneimar lo tasur mikol davar sheyagidu lecha yaminu shmol. I'm going to stop here because it's getting late. It goes into some detail here. The only other, so this is how the Rambam holds. Now, the basis for Rambam comes from several sources, and we're by no means going to go through all of them. I'll just point out one because it's going to be relevant relatively soon. In the Sugyan Masechet Shabbat about Chanukah, which is Sugya certainly worth learning. It's only a few daf. The Gemara here on Daf Chaf Gimel Amud Aleph says, "My nivarev." So what do you say when you light Hanukkah lit, when you light Hanukkah candles? My nivarev asher kiddishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lanik ner shel Hanukkah. Right? That's the bracha that we say. V'hechan tzivanu. Where were we commanded? What's the Gemara's question here?
What is the
where we were commanded to make a blessing over the Chanukiah.
Right. Would the Torah ever tell us that we have to light Hanukkah candles that we would make a blessing? So Heichan Sivanu, where were we commanded that we could say in this Nusach HaBracha, that God commanded us to do this. Rav Avia Amar Milo Tasur. He says we learn it from this pasuk, Lo Tasur, right, where it says Al Pia Torah, right, from Parashatim Al Pia Torah Sheyarucha, Al Mishpasher Yamulucha Taaseh, Lo Tasur Min Advashi Yagiducha Yaminu Small. Right, that's the Aseh and the Lotase that the Rambam quote in Hilchot Mamrim. Rav Nechemia Amar, Sha'al Avicha v'yagencha zikenecha b'yom rula. Right? So you'll know that's Ta'azinu, and it says, Zechor Yemot Olam, Binu Shon Fador Edor, Sha'al Avicha v'yagencha zikenecha b'yom rula. So this is altogether a very interesting little sugya, and it goes on. But it's interesting to know that there's look about what the source is for this idea that we can say that we were commanded to light the Chanukiah. According to Rav Avia, it's from Motasur, and according to Rabbi Nechemia, it's Misha'al Avicha. So any of you might ask, but I think Paul especially usually asks this question. These are like an asmachta. In other words, the first pasuk, the first one, Milot Asur, that does seem to be explicit, right? You're not allowed to deviate from what the Chachamim tell you, and it's in Parshat Shoftim, and it's in a context that we would consider to be like a halacha context. The pasuk of Sha'al Avicha v'yagedcha zikenecha b'yom rulach is in the Shirat Azinu. It doesn't sound like it's a halachic source. So what's the basis for their machloket? And how does the Rambam know that we go like Rav Avia? This is just I'm going to leave some of these as questions because, like I said, it's a longer discussion. The last thing I want to show you is a fascinating thing, and I don't know if we ever came across this in one of our previous shiurim or not. But I actually, before I was giving this shiur many years ago, I gave a shiur about a related topic. The Rambam in the Sefer Mitzvot, you've never done this. Read the Hakdama to the Sefer Mitzvot. It's not very long, and the Rambam explains why he writes the Sefer Mitzvot. So you may be familiar with this idea. The Rambam wasn't the first one to list 613 mitzvot. In the era of the Gaonim, there were piyutim that were devoted to this topic of listing the mitzvot, and that subgenre of piyut was called the azharot, where paitanim would list the 613 mitzvot. But also notably, one of the most important halachic works that preceded the Rambam was the Halachot Gedolot, and the Halachot Gedolot lists as part of his halachic work 613 mitzvot. Now, if you read the Hakdama to the Sefer Mitzvot, the Rambam doesn't mention the Bahag by name, as I recall, but he clearly attacks him, and he basically says none of these people knew how to count mitzvot because they count the craziest things, but the only one he really takes to task is the Bahag, the Baal Halachot Gedolot, because I'm definitely paraphrasing here, but it's as if the Baal Halachot Gedolot, he should know better. That he says, like, I can forgive the Azharot people because they're writing poetry, and it's not that the Rambam didn't respect poetry, but he wouldn't think that people would use it as a halachic source or a halachic resource. But he says, look, people are learning the halachot gedolot. Again, he doesn't say halachot gedolot explicitly, but he says, halachic work should know better. And he attacks him for not making a proper list. And so the Rambam, before he gives us his list of the 613 mitzvot, he lays out shorashim, and the shorashim are his rules that he developed for figuring out what goes in the list of mitzvot minat Torah and what does not go in the list of mitzvot minat Torah. So the very first shoresh, which in fact seems to be obvious, has to do with what we're talking about. It says, Shosh Harishon, Shein Ra'ui limnot bichlal ze hamitzvot shehin midurabanan. It's not proper to list mitzvot midurabanan in this list of 613 mitzvot that are supposed to be from the Torah. And he says, this shouldn't have even come up for discussion. The Gemara says, the Gemara in Makot, that says that there were 630 mitzvot that were given to Moshe at Sinai. How could we possibly say that some mitzvah midurabanan would have been included in the 613 mitzvot that were given to Moshe at Sinai? Says, but we were aroused to talk about this because a lot of people made a mistake about this. And here he's referring to the Bahag. Manu ner Chanukah, umikra Megillah, b'chol mitzvot aseh, v'chein mea brachot b'chol yom, v'nichum avelim, v'bikur cholim, v'urat metim, v'albashat arumim, v'chishuv tkufot, v'shmona asam ligmor behen et ha'alel. Right? So he says, look, there are people who listed all these things which are clearly mitzvot midurabanan and counted them to come up with a total of 613 mitzvot from the Torah. So he says it doesn't make any sense. And so he goes on and on. Because it's getting late, I won't go through all of this. And he finishes off. He says, like, okay, I've explained this first shoresh that we don't count mitzvot midrabanan in the Taryag mitzvot, and I've explained this in such a way that there should be no doubt left to anybody that this is true. Now, you would think that that would end the discussion. Certainly, the Rambam thought it ended the discussion. But the Ramban wasn't so sure. So the Ramban famously wrote Hasagot, right? He wrote his critical comments on the Sefer HaMitzvot. And one of the things that you see about the Ramban here, and this you will see throughout the Ramban's writings on the Gemara, the Ramban defended the Gaonim against attack from people like the Rambam. And the Bahag was in the Gaonim. And the Ramban wrote his Hasot on the Rambam in part, maybe even in large part, as a defense of the Bahag. And so here, and this is much, much longer than the Rambam. Like I say, if we ever give a shir on this will take quite a long time to go through both the Rambam and the Ramban here. But despite the fact that the Rambam makes this chad v'chalak pronouncement that you don't count mitzvot midrabanan as in the Taryag mitzvot, the Ramban says, I'm not so sure. Why is he not so sure? So the kitzur of it is this. The Ramban questions the whole notion that there are, in fact, 113 mitzvot in the Torah. He challenges this notion. He doesn't challenge the fact that the Gemara says it, but what he challenges is that was an idea that was agreed upon by all the Rabbanim through all time. And he brings very good counter arguments. His first and his strongest counter argument is when you learn Mishnah and Gemara, you will come across malakot bein Tanaim about specific mitzvot, whether they're a reshut or a chovah, right? Sometimes we have things for example, Sotah, the Kineat Ishto, right? So in Parshat Sotah, when it describes the procedure, before it describes the procedure of Sotah, it talks about that the husband, it says the husband is Kineat Ishto. Divrei Rabbi Yishmael Reshut. Rabbi Akiva omer chova. According to Rabbi Ishmael, the Torah means that it's permitted for a husband to be mekaneh et ishto. And of course, that's within the context of the specific requirements for kinui, which we won't go into. Rabbi Ishmael is saying that the Torah here is giving permission to the husband to be mekaneh. Rabbi Akiva says no, chova. He has to. When it says mekaneh et ishto, it doesn't mean he can be mekaneh et ishto. It means it has to be. In other words, if there are certain circumstances that come about, it's his chova to be mekaneh et ishto. Similarly, le'olam bahem ta'avodu, right? About Evet Kanani. It says that you always have to make them serve you. Rabbi Akiva says chova. He says the Torah is telling you for an Evet Kanani, they always have to be an Evet Kanani. Rabbi Yishmael Omer Rashut. No, it's permitted to always keep them as your servant, but you don't have to. And there's more. We won't go through all of them. So what's the point? If you can have a machloket about whether something is a mitzvah, whether it's a chovah or a reshut, so if it's a chovah, then it's a mitzvah. Okay. So why doesn't the Gemara ask, let's say in these examples with Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva, why doesn't the Gemara ask for Rabbi Yishmael, if you hold that kinui is not a mitzvah d'oraita, so you've taken one mitzvah out of the Taryag mitzvot. So what mitzvah will you put into place? That is, if the concept of Taryag mitzvot is sacrosanct, you have to have 613 mitzvot. That count, to be precise. So anytime somebody would say that such and such is not a mitzvah, the Gemara should right away ask them, so what mitzvah are you going to put in its place? But the Gemara never does that. That's one of the Ramban's major objections to the whole idea. So the Ramban challenges the very notion that there is such a thing as Taryag mitzvot. He says it could be that Rabbi Simai, who brings the drasha of Taryag mitzvot in Masechet Makot, it could be that would be the other way around. It could be that he had a way of counting mitzvot. He came up with 613 mitzvot, and so then he made an asmachta. The asmachta you probably know. It says Tzivah Moshe and Torah Bikamatri is 611, and then the first two Aseret HaDibrot, Anochi, Lo Tiyeh, everybody heard those. So Torah Tzivah Moshe, that is, Moshe gave us 611, and the other two everybody heard. So Ramban says it could be Rabbi Simai made up this asmachta as a reminder for his particular count, but not everybody agreed with his count. Now, why am I telling you all this? So we just said in the Gemara, the way to understand our Gemara is that everybody who violates a mitzvah midrabanan is Mushbava Omeid Mehar Sinai to not violate any mitzvah midrabanan. And so if that's true, I mentioned this last time, if that's true, then it should be that every mitzvah midrabanan, when you're over on a mitzvah midrabanan, then you're over on a mitzvah d'oraita. So not only are you over, let's say when you eat a chatzi shiur according to Reish Lakish, not only over on eating chatzi shiur that's nisur d'Rabban, but on top of that, you're over on this general rule that you're not allowed to violate mitzvot d'Rabbanan. So this raises all kinds of questions, as you can see. So the Rambam, on the one hand, in the Shoresh Sham, says mitzvot d'Rabbanan per se do not come into the listing of the Taryag mitzvot. But he says in Hilchot Mamrim, I'm not saying this is not a contradiction, but I'm just pointing out there's a bit of a contrast. He says in Hilchot Mamrim, you're chayav d'oraita, both from an asay and a lo tasay, to follow mitzvot midrabanan. So we understand that. I think I'm going to leave it at this. This opens up a lot of questions. But the way Rashi learns our sugya seems to go in line with, at least at first blush, with this idea that we see in the Rambam in Hilchot Mamrim, that if you're over on a mitzvah midrabanan, you're also over on a deoraita. So I think we'll leave it at that for now. But are there any questions or any comments?
Now, couldn't it be argued that if you're over on a mitzvah derabanan, you're actually potentially over? I mean, since one of the Noachide commandments, at least according to the Ramban, is that our dinim. If in fact you're over on a mitzvah derabanan, you're also over on the Noachide commandments.
Well, no, I'm not sure.
Maybe I'm butchering things.
No. But if let me see if I understand. Your question is, before we had the Torah, we had the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noah,
right?
And so everybody in the world was commanded to follow the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noah. Then the Torah comes along, and the Torah says, you, B'nai Israel, you have to follow this, not just these 7 mitzvot, but a whole bunch of other mitzvot. So what you're wondering is, so let's say you eat, for example, Ev Nachai, right? So one of the mitzvot B'nai Noach is you're not allowed to eat flesh from a live animal. That's Evram Minachai. You can't tear off the leg of a cow and eat that. You have to, even if you don't have to keep kosher, even if you don't have to slaughter that animal, but you can only eat it once the animal is dead. That's part of the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach. So now you're saying, so what if I eat Evram Minachai as a Jew? Maybe I'm over on 2 mitzvot. I'm over on both the mitzvah that the Torah gave me, and also one of the mitzvot of B'nai Noach. Is that your question?
Not exactly. Given that, I mean, as I recall, one of the Noachide commandments that we're supposed to establish law courts.
Okay.
Or a code of law or a code of law, and by extension, courts of law. Therefore, wouldn't that seem to require obedience to mitzvot derabanan?
Well,
is this in fact irrelevant? This may be irrelevant to our particular case.
It's not completely irrelevant, and because it's late, I don't want to go into it too much. I'm going to give you, look, the basic answer to your question is that the way Chazal understood Matan Torah is that once Bnei Israel received the Torah, that superseded for Bnei Israel, that superseded the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach. So the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach per se were no longer mitzvot that Bnei Israel followed, because now they have the Torah, and the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach are subsumed under the Torah. The mitzvot per se are superseded by all of the mitzvot of the Torah. And if we check carefully, we'll see that the 7 mitzvot B'nai Noach are included in mitzvot that are also given to Bnei Israel. What I just said is a slight oversimplification, because Gemara in Sanhedrin does point out that there could be differences between a mitzvah B'nai Noach and mitzvah B'nai Israel, where I don't want to get into it, but because it's too late. But basically that's the answer to your question. That is the reason that we as Bnei Israel have to follow mitzvot Rabbanan is because the Torah tells us. And if you're not Jewish, not a Bnei Israel, you have to follow whatever courts are, that whose jurisdiction you're in, because that's a mitzvah that was given to Bnei Noah. But once the Torah was given, then our mitzvah to follow mitzvot midrabanan are included in the Torah itself. So we don't have to refer back to mitzvot b'nei Noah. Like I say, I'm oversimplifying a little bit. That's basically the answer. So, but it's a good question, and it's interesting you bring it up. It's also interesting, maybe this is part of the intention of your question. It's interesting that that is one of the mitzvot b'nei Noah, right? The idea of establishing a judicial system is one of the essential mitzvot that was given to all mankind. But here, in our context, it's a little bit different because the purpose, there's a dual purpose in a sense to the Beit Din HaGadol, which is both to interpret the Torah for us and tell us mitzvot min HaTorah, but in addition, they have authority to pass laws that the Torah does not explicitly say. And that's an important distinction. And we'll talk more about it next time, because it'll be relevant to the next part of the sugya. So I think we'll leave it at that. Thank you, everybody, for bearing with me. Have a good night. I'll see you next week.
Thanks.